All right, welcome to another edition of Maverick University. I'm pleased to welcome Brother Garry Way and Brother Richard Way to the podcast, and we're excited about the topics that we're going to be discussing today. We're talking about parent relationships with children, and so they have a ministry called the PK Conference, and it's something that you held since the year 2000. There's a period where it wasn't held, and now we're starting it up again, and always had a lot of interest in that, I imagine. And you're talking about how the conference, stays in one area or it travels from ministry to ministry. Right now it's in Texas, I believe, right?
Well, we started it when I pastored in Gainesville, Texas, north of Dallas-Fort Worth, and we started in year 2000, and then we went all the way through 2012, and then I resigned from the pastorate in 2013 and began a ministry in Israel. So we didn't do it for, 5 years, and then our home church, Central Baptist Church in Center, Texas, Brother Danny Dotson, he asked me if we were going to start it back up because he had been to one of the previous ones in years past, and so he said, we'll do it there in Center. So we did 2018, 2019, and so we've got one coming up December 4th and 5th of this year.
Okay.
So it went for a number of years, helped a lot of people, and then we've kind of reintroduced it, I guess you could say.
Sure.
And
so let's talk about the genesis of the conference and a little bit of family history as well, as I understand it. Your father was a pastor in ministry. Obviously, you pastored in ministry. You're pastoring in ministry, and it's an exceptional thing, I think, to have generations of Christians,
right,
still serving the Lord like
right,
that. Generations of people that are in ministry is even a greater exception, and then pastor is an even greater exception, I think. So your family finds itself in an elite crowd, I suppose, a fortunate one,
right,
and a God-blessed one. And so obviously this PK conference came as a birth of this family history, and it obviously birthed out of experiences, personal experiences, and birthed out of your experiences growing up in a preacher's home, your experiences growing up in a preacher's home, and all of that. So one of the main principles that we've talked about, and we'll launch here and kind of turn you guys loose here, is this idea of the relationship rules. Relationship, I guess, is the...
right.
I'm using the word relationship a lot in that phrase, but the relationship/rule relationship, how they correlate together. And so what does that even mean? What is that? What is the relationship there?
Years ago I don't know who said it, but I read it, it stuck in my heart, where the author said, rules without relationship equals rebellion. And it just stuck with me because I'd grown up in a pastor's home. My dad started pastoring when I was 8 years old. Unique story. I started kindergarten the day my dad started Bible college, so it was kind of a unique startup for us, but he began to pastor his last year of Bible college. So I grew up in a pastor's home. Now I'm the oldest of three boys, and so we were PKs. I remember when somebody said, well, you're a PK, and I thought, what's a PK? So you're a preacher's kid. Okay, I got it. And so I grew up in that pastor's home, and to be perfectly frank, my dad didn't really have time for me as the oldest. My brothers and I are about 4.5, 5 years apart. And so I grew up not really wanting to be in the ministry. I didn't despise it, but I felt like it was taking my dad's time. Mm-hmm. So then I started Bible college and I began ministry. But in 1986, I took my first pastorate there in North Texas. And a few years into that, at that time, my son was just about to turn 6 years old. He was beginning kindergarten. I took the church in August, so he began kindergarten in September. And so I thought, I began to try to read, and nobody had written anything on that particular relationship between a pastor and his children. And so I began to try to read. I began to talk to preachers, and I'd go to conferences, and I would sit down with some pastors that maybe they had teenagers or even grown kids, and I would say, tell me what you did with your children. And then one time it was really unique because I asked a pastor, I said, would you mind if I talk to your kids? He goes, oh no, I don't want you to talk to my kids. And I was kind of taken aback from that, but I realized that something was wrong. And I thought, there's nothing out there to help pastors, and particularly pastors, but even anybody in full-time Christian service lives in a unique bubble, you might say.
Sure.
And I thought, okay, I've got two kids, and so by this time, they're in high school. They want to go do right, but I thought, what can I do to maybe, my two younger brothers, they don't care about church at all. They don't go to church. They don't care about church at all. And I thought, how can I avoid that with my kids? And so I took that thing, rules without relationship equals rebellion, and I began to say, okay, what can I do to prevent what happened to my brothers, to my own family, and what can I do? And so we began to read on the family, and another one I read was that, how do you spell love? T-I-M-E. And I thought, okay, you spend time, now you build a relationship. So when you have rules, standards of holiness, biblical standards of holiness, there should not be any rebellion. And so I began to try to, my wife and I began to incorporate that into our family to spend time with our children. And so we started a Preachers Kids Conference to help young pastors and help young staff members such as yourself. Sure. And say, maybe you can come to the conference and it's just one day. It starts Friday afternoon and ends Saturday at lunch. And what can you learn from that conference that you can take home and say, that'll work with my family to help long term. And you have two young children. And so, if you were able to come to the conference, you might be able to pick up something and take it home and say, that'll work. That'll help me get my child's heart. What did Solomon say? Give me your heart. Told his son, give me your heart. And so that was my goal, was to get my children's heart so that I could have a relationship with them, so that when I began to present biblical holiness, these rules, that there would be no rebellion.
Well, let's face it, growing up in a Christian home myself, and you guys as well, many times as a teenager, you see the rules, you see the what, you don't necessarily see the why, and unless you actually have trust from the person you're listening to, you're not gonna take their word for it.
Exactly.
And you're gonna rebel against it. But Richard, I want to have you kind of elaborate on this in your personal life. Maybe was there a moment growing up in a Christian home, in a preacher's home, that you had that moment of rebellion and you overcame it because you knew you had a relationship with mom and dad? Was there a struggle at some point? Maybe there's a turning point in your life where, man, I was going the wrong way. I turned another direction, and this is the reason why.
I don't recall any particular instance where I was, obviously I think every teenager struggles with rules.
Sure.
But a healthy relationship with my parents, kept me from drifting too far. I always saw a genuine, sincere desire to serve the Lord and to please Him from my mom and dad, and so that I think helped me develop a relationship with the Lord and want to please and honor Him too. Genuinely, is we hear a lot of just be real. I think first off we had to be real with God and examine our relationship with Him, and I saw that regularly with my parents, but then also real with each other. Just be comfortable with who God made you be, to be, and to serve Him. Even the Bible, serve Him in sincerity and in truth. And I was able to see that in my parents, and I thank the Lord for that. And so there wasn't, I can't recall a time where I was just, super rebellious and something turned. But having that healthy relationship and understanding the rules. And, I think a lot of times parents are scared when their kids ask why. But, I never felt that I couldn't go to my parents. I always felt comfortable to say, hey, why do we do this? What's this for? Why are we doing this? And they were always willing just to be real and sit down with me and say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And it was always Bible-based. And
that's
so,
the key, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the key. And I remember, going back to the conference, even now, there's conferences for church growth. There's music conferences, there's youth conferences, and we're for all those things. We're certainly not against any of those, but I remember my dad saying, if we lose the family, we've lost the church, we've lost the youth, everything should be structured around the family, but yet there's not any conferences for families. And I understand it's a difficult task asking whole families to come. But that's our desire, is just to say, hey, this is a Preachers Kids Conference, this is a family conference where, maybe you can come and take a nugget that you can apply. Obviously everything that's being taught or said doesn't apply to every home, but maybe you can just take one little piece of information and say, hey, that'll work with our family, and apply that, and hopefully, keep from some of the rebellion or some of the heartache and headache that.
Why fix a problem when you can prevent it?
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with, we like to be proactive instead of reactive.
Sure.
And so that's what the conference is all about. And I thank the Lord for my parents and the great balance that they had growing up, and being good examples of what a Christian ought to be.
One of the things you said was being real, and you said it several times. Especially as Christians, we can get caught up with putting on the tie, putting on the suit coat, and going to church can become an act.
Right. Absolutely. Going through the motions.
Even just in the typical layman's world, it can be an act. Putting on Christian service, on Saturday, doing soul winning, when there is no relationship. Right. And so I guess it's true even with our relationship with our Heavenly Father, with rules without relationship equals rebellion, and maybe that's why so many Christians do go haywire. Right. They seem to be on the right track. They seem to be on the outside, from appearances, seem to be doing pretty well. Now, one question, and we're almost running out of time. Probably have time for one more question. You guys can elaborate on it. Why a PK conference? Obviously, a lot of what you're giving us is great for homes, no matter who you are. It's principles that can be universally applied. But what obstacles does a kid growing up in a preacher's home have, or what could be obstacles that are in a preacher's home that other children may not have to encounter and deal with?
I remember when I was young, I was probably preteen, 11, 12, maybe 13 at the time. Church member came up to me and says, you have to act right because you're the preacher's kid. And I thought, okay, 11, 12, 13, it doesn't really ring. And so I told my dad, and my dad said, let me tell you something. He said, you don't have to act right because you're a preacher's kid. You act right because you're my kid. And sometimes I think parents, pastors do it, and certainly a lot of times church members do it. They hold the kids to a higher standard.
As if it's a church office.
Yeah.
You got pastor, deacons, PK.
Yeah. And it's like, wait a minute, my kids are like your kids.
Yeah.
They're going to do silly things. They're normal children. Just because they're a preacher's kid doesn't mean they're going to be perfect. They're going to do things wrong. So don't hold my kids to a higher standard, because they're going to do dumb things, because all kids do dumb things. And I told my kids, I said, look, I don't expect you to act right and do right because you're the preacher's kid. I said, you're my kid. And more specifically, I said, because your last name's Way. That's why I want you to do right, not because you're the preacher's kid. But sometimes preacher's kids feel like they have to live to a higher standard, and then that's when the fakeness can come in.
Yeah.
Because they feel like they have to live up here, and they're really not there yet spiritually, but they act like that, and then they get to going through the motions, and then they begin to fake. And if you've been in ministry very long, you'll see that in a lot of pastors' homes where the kids it's a facade. Mm-hmm. And the moment they get to a point in life where they get to make their own decisions, they're gone.
Yeah.
Because they were held to a higher standard. And there shouldn't be a higher standard because they're a preacher's kids.
Yeah.
They're kids. And I tell that at our preacher's kids conference. Just those are your kids, and give your life to your kids. And that's the thing that's necessary.
Yeah.
I think it has to do with expectation. For some reason, it seems like the preacher's kids have a higher expectation because they're the preacher's kids. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times, all eyes are on you. You're the pastor, the wife, the kids, and you ought to be this because you're the pastor. And I think the expectation sometimes is overwhelming for preacher's kids, and so therefore and I don't like to give anybody excuses for why they do what they do, but understand sometimes those expectations can become overwhelming and cause someone to say, well, I can't do this, so I'm going to put on a show just so my dad won't have a bad reputation, or something like to that degree. But I think certainly expectations are greater in many situations of the pastorate with their kids, and I think some of the challenges why a PK conference, because sometimes the pastors, the husbands, the fathers, they struggle with juggling those,
Time management.
Yeah, time
Got so much
management,
going on.
the balance in trying to pastor the church, trying to be a good husband, trying to be a good father. And I mean, you're in the ministry at times, the ministry's overwhelming, but then you still have to be a husband and you still have to be a dad, and sometimes just all of it can be overwhelming. So sometimes the expectations from the husband, wife, all the way down to children.
And I know I've been guilty of it as well. I remember growing up down in Brother Angel's church in Bourbonnais as a young child, and I remember saying something to my mom and dad. One of his daughters is same age as me, we're peers, and I had made some kind of a comment about something that one of Brother Angel's children had done. It's like, oh, well, that was Brother Angel's child, and and my parents quickly corrected me on that, and they understood what you're talking about, that there is this expectation that is not realistic and it's unfair as well.
It is.
And they said, are they any different than you? Are they, should you treat them any different? Should you expect them to be any different than any other kid in our church? And it kind of dawned on me. And I guess I learned that lesson, even though I never grew up in a preacher's home or anything like that. I knew that, oh man, I always gave them extra grace. In fact, if there's anything, I let them, get away with more in my mind than I would anybody else. Rather than holding them to a higher standard, I held them to a lower standard, I guess. I don't know. But I appreciate you guys helping us and talking with us about this. And we'll probably do another episode as well. And so check in the description if you want to see the next video as we continue our conversation.